Now before I get into any code, I want to show you the graph, but also explain some of the different pieces to it. So in the item that we're building in this sample, we're charting a single value. And you'll notice here we have the actual value that we're charting. But around that actual value, the bullet graph will be able to display some contextual information in order to add more to what's being charted here. So first of all, you'll notice that we have a number of different qualitative ranges. So just because you have a value, that doesn't always tell you everything that you need. Maybe you want to know if these are good, better, best, or some other way of qualifying the data that comes through. So in this sample, I have some background colors set up to show that we have good values, we have better values, and then we have the best values. And then you also notice there's another extra line in the graph here for the goal. And so the value that's being charted here, obviously the goal was to get to just a little past 800,000, but the actual value came in just under 900,000. So this is a typical type of scenario you might see in many type of applications. Well, now you have an idea of how the pieces fit together. Let me show you the code that's necessary in order to render this out to the user. So here we are in Visual Studio 2010, and you'll notice that I've created just a small class here to act as the container for the data for the XAMPP bullet graph. So it's the performance data class, and you'll notice that we have basically all the pieces of information that you saw within the screenshot I showed you a moment ago. We've got the minimum value of the graph, the maximum value of the graph, the actual revenue, the target or the goal, and then also those three qualitative pieces there. We have the good, better, and best comparative threshold. And what we'll do is use this class in order to provide data up to the bullet graph. So if we come over here to the view model class, you'll see here that basically the view model here just takes the instance of the performance data class and exposes it as the performance property. And then it's lazy initialized so that when the program accesses it, it will create an instance of that class and provide some values. So here I'm just providing them locally. Obviously you'd get them from somewhere else, but the minimum would be 0 and maximum is 1,000. The actual revenue is coming in at 875, but the target was 825. And then we can say that those ranges that we were looking for was, 0 to 600 was good, and the better is from 600 to 800, and the best is from 800 to 1,000. So all of this is implemented in a view model that inherits from the view model base, and the base class, all it does is implements iNotifyPropertyChanged. And really at this point, the setter is not even necessary in order to worry about iNotifyPropertyChanged, but I just put it in there for good measure. So now that we have the view model in play, let's go up to the view. Now you'll notice here that the designer is doing some design time data binding, and that's because I've set up the view model to work within the XAML. There's no code in the code behind at this point. But the first thing you need to be aware of is the namespace declaration, and so I just called this IGGauge at the time, and so we're looking at infragistics.controls.charts, and then I'm also bringing in the view model namespace, and you'll notice here we just have the project name views and then the XAMPP bullet graph, and that's where that view model lived. So instantiating the view model in the Windows resources and giving the key of view model, now I can set the layout root grid to take a look at the static resource of view model in order to bind correctly to our view model. So then we have the bullet graph. Now the bullet graph is made up of a couple different pieces. We have the scale, featured measure, and comparative measures. Let's take each one at a time here. So for the scale, what you're creating is you're setting up the bounds. So first of all, you're saying what the minimum and maximum values are. You're adding in the tick mark groups and then also the label groups, and then you'll put some ranges in there. So right here at the beginning, we're declaring the quantitative scale, and we're saying the minimum is whatever's coming in from the view model under the performance.minimum property, and the same thing with the maximum. And we're giving it an interval so that the tick marks can be generated in between, saying we're having an interval of 100. Now for the tick marks, we're coming down and declaring a tick mark group, and then saying we want a bullet graph tick mark. The stroke is a light gray, the background is a little bit lighter gray, and a thickness of 1, and so that gives us our tick marks going across. Now in order to label the tick marks, we create a label group, and then inside of that the bullet graph label group. And the string format here basically just says take the value based off of the interval that's generated and give us the value with a K next to it to show that the value is in thousands. Now the last piece here, as far as the quantitative scale is concerned, is the ranges that we're looking at. And so that's each one of these items here, the gray background colors. So we want to be able to say whether or not we're looking at the good, better, or best ranges of our data. So we'll create a qualitative range for each one, and we'll get our value again out of the view model, looking to the good comparative threshold, better comparative threshold, and best comparative threshold. And for each one of them, we're just giving a different background color. So it's pretty simple to set those up. So that's the scale. The next thing that we want to concern ourselves with is the featured measure. Now the featured measures are the actual data that you're plotting, and obviously you can have more than one, but for the sample I've chosen just to use one. And so this is the actual revenue that we're charting on the graph right now. So we declare the featured measures and instantiate a featured measure within here. The value again is coming from the view model. The stroke is just set up as null right now. And the start extent and the end extent are the settings that you use to decide where within the range of the graph will be set up. So if you set start extent to 0, it would be all the way down at the bottom of the graph. So this kind of centers it within the graph itself, and then we'll give it a black color. So the last thing that we need to discuss is the comparative measure, and this is the goal that we were tracking. So we'll open up the comparative measures and create a comparative measure, getting the value from the view model, and doing the same thing with the start and the end extent. This one's a little bit longer so that you can see that it's kind of going past it within the graph, and taking off the stroke and setting the thickness and the width so that you can see it pretty easily. So once we've had each one of those, that gives us all the information that the graph needs in order to render out a bullet graph just like you see here.
Infragistics. On the web at infragistics.com.